Lady Jane Grey never lusted for power. If she didn't fight for the throne, she was thrown onto it that a teenage girl, quiet, brilliant, and obedient, turned into England's queen overnight. But behind that glittering crown was a blade already being sharpened. They called her the 9 Days Queen. Because on the 10th day, they came for her life. Stay with this story till the final breath and hit subscribe, because this isn't just a tragedy, it's a lesson written in royal blood. Lady Jane Grey was born into a noble family, but never raised for war or even courtly ambition. But she wasn't like other girls of her rank. While others danced or embroidered, Jane buried herself in ancient books. She spoke Latin fluently, read Greek for pleasure, and debated scholars twice her age. Even her tutors whispered, "This girl had a mind sharper than any nobleman's blade." But brilliance doesn't protect you from being used, especially when your blood is royal and England is desperate for a Protestant heir. Jane had no throne in her dreams, only peace and philosophy. But powerful men had other plans. Her father-in-law, John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, saw opportunity. King Edward VI, the young Protestant king, was dying. And his half-sister Mary, a Catholic, was next in line to stop her. The Duke rushed to secure the crown for Jane. He married her to his own son, then pressured the dying king to rewrite succession, placing Jane ahead of Mary. Jane didn't scheme. She didn't beg for power. She was simply told, "You are now Queen of England." And with trembling hands, she accepted, not out of ambition, but duty. On July 10th, 1553, Lady Jane Grey was led into the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, but as a queen. Trumpets blared, proclamations echoed, but there was no joy in the streets, no crowds cheering her name. The people didn't recognize her rule. They whispered of Mary, the true heir. And across the countryside, support for Mary surged like wildfire. Even Jane's own counsel began to falter as she sat on the throne for 9 cold days. A teenage girl wrapped in silks too heavy for her frame. Behind her eyes was fear, not for herself, but for what came next. Because when power shifts in silence, it often returns with a screamed, "A tea first." Jane held on, not with ambition, but with obedience. She had never wanted the throne, but her father-in-law, the powerful Duke of Northumberland, had whispered promises and threats in equal measure. That he needed her as queen, that she needed to survive. But whispers turned to roars. That Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's eldest daughter, was marching south, gathering armies, nobles, and even the common people. That England was choosing sides, and Jane was losing. Inside the tower, Jane received the news. Her own council had betrayed her. They had switched allegiance to Mary. And just like that, her reign and her fate collapsed in a single breath. The very palace that crowned her now became her cell. The crown had been taken, the throne lost, but Lady Jane Grey? She remained locked in the Tower of London, the same tower where kings had dined, now echoed only with the sound of her prayers. That she was just 16. No armies, no escape, no voice loud enough to change history. And yet, she didn't cry. Jane spent her days writing letters, reading scriptures, and trying to comfort the few who remained loyal to her. When Mary Tudor finally took the crown, the world expected mercy. After all, Jane had ruled for only 9 days. She hadn't schemed, she hadn't fought, but mercy in royal courts is always tangled in politics and bloodlines. At first, Queen Mary hesitated. She knew Jane was young, innocent, a puppet, not a player, so she spared her. For a while, Jane remained in the tower, watched by guards, visited by priests, her fate dangling like a candle in the wind. But outside the walls, rebellion stirred. A Protestant uprising threatened Mary's fragile hold on the throne. And Jane, still alive, still beloved by Protestants, suddenly became dangerous. She wasn't just a forgotten girl in a tower anymore. She was a symbol. And symbols, they can either be protected or destroyed. The decision was made in silence. One royal signature sealed her fate. That on February 12, 1554, the tower bell tolled softly, not for ceremony, but for death. Jane was summoned from her cell. She didn't resist. She didn't plead. Her face, pale but steady, seemed to carry a strange calm. She walked with her prayer book pressed to her chest. No crown, no jewels, just a simple gown. As she passed the cold walls of the tower, Even the guards lowered their eyes at the scaffold. The crowd stood silent. She wasn't a traitor in their eyes. She was a girl, a victim of power struggles. Too big for her fragile shoulders, Jane looked to the sky and whispered, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Before kneeling, Jane turned to the executioner. That her voice was soft, but every word struck like thunder. "I pray you dispatch me quickly." She handed him a small coin, a token of forgiveness. Then she tied her own blindfold. Trembling only once as darkness swallowed her final view of the world, kneeling at the block, she stretched her arms forward, searching for the wood. "Where is it? What shall I do?" she asked, voice cracking for the first time. That a gentle hand guided her. As she found the block, laid her head, in the tower, once filled with whispers of kings and traitors, held its breath. The executioner hesitated. This wasn't a rebel or a schemer. This was a girl, barely 17, whose only crime was wearing the wrong crown. Then, with a swing swift and merciless, the axe fell. The courtyard didn't erupt, it froze. That nobles looked away. The crowd stayed silent. Even the birds above the tower seemed to vanish. Blood darkened the straw beneath her, and the body of Lady Jane Grey, England's 9 days queen, lay still beside the very crown that had destroyed her. The crown lay beside her, gleaming in the cold morning sun, but no one moved to pick it up. That not the guards, that not the council, that not even Mary, now queen, who had ordered Jane's death. It was as if the crown itself had turned toxic, as if it had soaked up Jane's blood, and now carried her silent scream out for years after. They said the tower felt different, colder, as though every stone still remembered the girl who didn't chase power, but was devoured by it. Servants began whispering, quietly, fearfully, about a presence that lingered late at night. They swore they saw a pale girl in Tudor white, standing by the window of the room where Jane had spent her last hours. She never spoke. She just looked out, toward the sky she'd never see again. And some said, if you listened closely near the old stones of the tower's walls, you could still hear her final words, echoing like a forgotten prayer. "I am the queen no more, but I am still innocent." It wasn't just a haunting, it was a memory the nation couldn't erase. Queen Mary, bloody to some, burdened to others, never spoke of Jane again. Not in court, not in council, not even in confession, but those closest to her noticed something. She stopped wearing rubies, she stopped speaking of crowns with pride. And she ordered the execution site cleaned. But never blessed. Some said she was haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt for in killing Jane, she hadn't silenced a rival, she had awakened a sorrow that would never leave her reign. Jane Grey's story wasn't one of power, was one of pressure. Of being born noble, but never free. Of being pushed onto a throne by those who feared losing their own. She never ruled a nation, but she ruled a moment. A moment so tragic. It never faded from England's memory, for the crown they gave her was too heavy. Not made of gold, but of betrayal, silence, and blood. And even now, her name isn't followed by the great or the just. It's followed by a question. What if? On the morning of her execution, Jane stepped into the tower courtyard, her face pale, but calmed as she held a small prayer book. Her hands didn't tremble. There was no royal procession, no crown. Just silence, and the sound of her own footsteps as she looked up at the sky, one final time. Not in fear, but in peace, as if she'd made peace with being remembered not as a queen, but as a girl who never wanted to be one. She forgave her enemies. Whispered one last prayer. And then, with dignity no blade could steal, Lady Jane Grey bowed her head. Lady Jane Grey reigned for just 9 days. Not long enough to pass a law, not long enough to win a award, but long enough to leave a shadow history couldn't erase. She wasn't crowned in gold, but in sorrow. Used by her family, abandoned by the crown. And remembered by the world as the queen who never asked to rule, but was punished as if she had seized everything. Today, her story is told not in triumph, but in tragedy. A silent warning from the pages of royal history. Sometimes, the crown doesn't bless, it devours.